who have worked so hard and done so much to bring this conference together. Allow me also to extend our special welcome in our own Malaysian way, Selamat Datang, to all those who have traveled from abroad to be with us today. I'm sure Palace of Golden Horses Kuala Lumpur will provide a serene and enjoyable environment for your serious deliberations, and we feel honored to have all of you here. We are highly honored to have Yang Amat Berbahagia Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad in this August meeting today. Yang Amat Berbahagia Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad has graciously accepted our invitation to deliver the keynote address for this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, immediately following a financial crisis, a flurry of activity takes place in the media, in academia, and among international organizations. They provide diagnosis of what caused the crisis and propose the economic remedies that might mitigate or even avoid future crises. However, over the past 100 years, often than not, we have seen these economic crises returning with greater vengeance and devastating consequences. Time and again, mainstream economy has imposed superficial changes that have lulled both policymakers and people at large into a false sense of security. In reality, the measures taken by the mainstream economy, utilizing current fundamentals and practices, have only provided temporary solutions. The central reason behind this prolonged economic and monetary calamity is the failure of mainstream economy in acknowledging the fact that these are the effects of Riba. Over the last 2 years, the annual World Conference on Riba has defined the concept of Riba and linked Riba to the socio-economic and economic miseries that have beset the world. The conference has been successful in providing real and not pseudo solutions. Among the solutions that the conference had proposed in the past is the return to real money, i.e. the use of gold and silver, which will eliminate inflation and recession, the need of establishing public banking that would remove the power of money creation by private banking cartel, and instituting home financing using the cooperative model, which will allow affordable homes to be built for the people. However, sadly, these initiatives that I have just mentioned have received far too little attention, especially from policymakers and other relevant stakeholders. This is due to the fact that our recommendations seek to overhaul the current economic and monetary system in its entirety. That makes it far less palatable to them. Nevertheless, we are firm in our belief that wrong is wrong, even everyone is doing it, and right is right, even no one is doing it. Hence, we will continue our efforts in realizing riba-free economies throughout the world. Ladies and gentlemen, now let me share what I see as the overarching goal of this conference. As I look at the great strengths and power of the people that are assembled here today, I see all levels of engagement: political, social, environmental, grassroots, and community. In the history of this conference, we have yet to see these many people representing such a diverse group. This year's conference is not only confined to the four walls of this hall, but beyond that, many from across the world are following us via live streaming broadcast. We must acknowledge that people are beginning to understand the harsh realities that mainstream economy has entrenched them. A movement is afoot to develop a just economy in the truest sense, from the ground up. Here, in the next 2 days and beyond, we have a great opportunity to sit down together and learn from each other's ideas and efforts. We believe that in order to surmount and surpass an economic catastrophe, our economic solutions must have high-level resilience, response that are hands-on, and reforms that are real and just. It is imperative that in order to form a powerful force, we need to join our intentions. So what are our mutually shared intentions that can be united so that we move together? Thus, we intend to forge links with individuals, organizations, and societies worldwide that would enable concerted efforts to be implemented in fighting riba. To continue exposing the pitfalls of the current economic and financial systems, both at micro and macro level. To persuade authorities worldwide in implementing steps that are practical, sustainable to remedy their individual economies. To encourage religious scholars to have a holistic approach in understanding and fighting riba. To formulate strategies to educate the public on riba. And last but not least, to chart systematic ways to move forward hereon to achieve the point where people can have the choice of a life without riba or rifqan. Ladies and gentlemen, before I end my speech, I would like to sincerely thank our supporters, sponsors, and well-wishers for their generous contributions that have made the organizing of this conference ever possible. I must render a very special thanks to Yang Berbahagia Tuan Haji Syamuddin Tan Sri Ubaidullah, the trustee of Ubaidi Foundation, for his unwavering support that he has rendered throughout these 3 years of organizing this conference. While I would reserve my thanks to the long list of helpers and enablers of this conference, I cannot resist the temptation to thank my partner in crime, our conference convener, Professor Dr. Ahmad Kamil Maidin Mira, who has given us all the valuable inputs in ensuring the objectives of the organizing this conference is. My heartfelt appreciation also goes to Sheikh Imran Hussein for the continued guidance and support, and to all the distinguished speakers, both from Malaysia and abroad, for the enormous contribution towards this conference and efforts in realizing riba-free economy worldwide. We also like to thank all local and foreign participants who have traveled all the way from Australia, Canada, Japan, Middle East, Indonesia, Singapore, and the United States of America, and all of you who are here, who are not here, but watching our telecast live through live streaming broadcast. Thank you for being here, and thank you for embracing Rifqan. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shirazdeen, for the speech. And now let me have the pleasure to call upon our utmost distinguished Yang Berbahagia Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Honorary President, Perdana Leadership Foundation, to deliver the keynote speech titled The Global Socio-Economic Turbulence, What Collective Action Nations Can Take. Please welcome Tun.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Mr. Shirazdeen, Chairman of this 10th Riba Conference, and Sri Syamuddin Ubaidullah, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to everyone. I would like to say thank you to the organizers of this Riba conference for inviting me to speak at this forum. I noticed that a new term has been introduced just now, unriba, to mean people who reject riba. I just want to relate these things to the audience, because in America there is a Muslim banker. He practices riba-less banking, of course, and he calls his bank La Riba. I believe La means no and Riba means riba. La Riba sounds very good to me, but we choose to call it unriba, well and good. Now, I've been asked to delivered this keynote address. And the theme of this keynote address is the global socio-economic turbulence, what collective action nations can take, obviously, to overcome the turbulence. Today we are seeing the world in total turbulence. It's not only economic, it's not only financial. You see social turbulence, you see also political turbulence. We see wars being fought, governments being brought down, new governments being set up, which in turn will be brought down by the same method. So there is a real turbulence, but a lot of this turbulence have their basis or their cause, the financial system, namely the banking system. Why does the banking system cause this turbulence? It's because banks are given tremendous powers. And as we know, power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts absolutely. What is the power of the banks? Well, it was invented by people who ran short of money to lend. Before there was banking, as we know them now, there were only money lenders. And money lenders lend the money that they have. If they don't have the money, they couldn't lend the money. But then they see profit in lending money, so they would like to have more money for themselves, so that they can lend more and more and more. So they invented the so-called conventional or modern banking system. And the bank is given this power to create money. Banks actually create money. That does not mean printing currency notes, although at one time there were banknotes. Now we don't use banknotes anymore, but there are other ways of creating money that does not involve printing banknotes. You must remember that even lately, when they have this quantitative easing that they talk about, and they were supposed to be printing or issuing billions of dollars and billions of pounds, but no real money was actually printed, because it will take a big printing machine to produce billions and billions of pounds. And you are going to see these banknotes, but you don't see any banknotes increasing in circulation. What it's meant by issuing this quantitative easing is to just write checks and credit into the banks. The bank then lend the money in the form of giving credit to the borrowers, but the borrowers also don't see any real cash. It's just credited to his account, and he wants to pay somebody. He doesn't give the person a cash, especially if it is a big sum of money. He issues a check, and the check is then goes back to the bank, and it is seldom that the bank has to pay cash to the person. All the bank does is to credit it to his account, so that when he wants to spend money, he can again issue checks. So you don't see any cash at all. So when banks are given the right to create money, they can create unlimited amounts of money without going through the process of printing currency notes. They used to. There were banknotes when I was a small boy. There were banknotes used, even in Malaysia, issued by the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank and Chartered Bank. But today, banks don't print money anymore. Only authorities print money. And the amount of money they can print is not sufficient to support the multifarious trading and business activities in any community. In Malaysia, for example, if the central bank were to issue all the money that is needed for our daily transaction, then we will be inundated with huge amount of cash, which would be, somebody would rob it from us or do something nasty to us to get hold of. But as you know, we all use checks and credit cards and the like. We don't see any money at all. So what is happening, of course, is that while the government may issue real cash, real printed currency notes for us to use for small things, but mainly the money that is used by us is in the form of checks, or nowadays, of course, in the form of credit cards and debit cards. No real cash is involved. This means that the bank can create any amount of wealth. Now, when you give that kind of power to the bank, and you also give to the bank this right to get a fixed return from the money they lend, obviously the banks want to lend more and more money, because anything they lend, they can get a return, a fixed return. It may be 1%, it may be 10%, it may be 20%, but the return is fixed. So even if the borrower goes bankrupt, the banks still make money. Of course, the bankrupt chap will have to lose everything, maybe sell off his property, but the bank does not lose. The bank collects back the money that is lent in the form of properties confiscated, or in the form of whatever cash that they can collect, or the property that they will take as collateral. So the banks do not stand to lose anything when they lend money. So the tendency is to lend more and more money, because they can create the money. You create the money and you lend it. And strangely, when you lend money, it becomes an asset for the bank. It has nothing, but once it issues some loans, that loan becomes an asset to the bank. In the accounting of the bank, that comes in as asset. And of course, if the banks fail to collect the interest and everybody loses money and they cannot get back anything at all, then banks will go bankrupt. But they believe that they will not go bankrupt. And so what happens was that, being given this authority, this power, this absolute power to issue credit or to create wealth, they lent more money, ever more money than they have. What happens during the subprime loan was that if you lend money, it becomes an asset to you. So lend as much money as possible and forget about the ability of the borrower to pay back. Of course, if the borrower doesn't pay back, you can confiscate his property. But what was forgotten was that if the borrower borrows the money and does not bill anything, there is nothing to confiscate. If it happens with 1, 2, 10, 100 persons, it's all. But when 1 million, 2 million, 3 million people fail to repay the loans that they have taken from the banks must write this down in their books as lost money. And so what happens was that the banks go bankrupt. The banks just cannot get back the money that they created and lent to these subprime borrowers. And so you see great companies like Lehman Brothers and others, these are the huge banks of America, going bankrupt because they have lent out so much money to people who could not pay, and they could not get back either the money or the property that is supposed to back the money. This is the cause of the crisis. But of course, beyond that, there are other abuses. The hedge funds, for example, the hedge funds also lend money, a lot of money, and they borrow also a lot of money from the bank. If you deposit with the hedge funds $1 million, if you have $1 million and you go to the bank and tells the bank, I'm going to deposit $1 million, but I'm now going to borrow, on the basis of that deposit, I'm going to borrow $30 million, the bank will say no. But it's different with hedge funds. If you put your $1 million with the hedge funds can now borrow 30 million from the banking system. With that 30 million, they will invest. And obviously, if they make a profit, they make a profit on 30 million, not on 1 million. And therefore, they can give to the people who invested with the hedge funds much bigger return than if the owner of the money were to invest himself in the stock market, for example. He would get a return only based on these million, but the hedge funds will get a profit based on 30 million. And of course, the hedge funds expect to pay a much bigger return to the investor and to pay back the loan that they have taken from the bank. Now that will happen, of course, when their investment is very good and there is profit to be made from the investment. But what happens when they invest in something that loses? When they do that, the loss will also be 30 times more than if the initial 1 million were invested. Now, when you lose 30 times more, you cannot recover the money. You just cannot recover the money either from the investor or from the market. You cannot recover the money, and you cannot pay the investor anything. Indeed, you will ask the investor to increase their investment, but the investor may not have the capacity to increase their investment, but they cannot repay the loans they have taken from the banks. And so the banks now were faced with losses. Because the hedge funds lost, the banks also lost, because the hedge funds couldn't pay back the loans that they have taken. This increase is called leveraging. Leveraging simply means increasing your borrowing, but it's a very nice term to use. People do not know. They thought that something has been done to leverage your 1 million into 30 million. So the banks go bankrupt, the hedge funds go bankrupt, the investor go bankrupt. And when the banks and everybody else go bankrupt, you have a financial crisis on your hand. Now, it is important to understand this, because if you want to overcome the crisis, you have to understand the causes. Basically, the cause is Riba, because banks make money from fixed return. And the urge, the greed, is to lend more and more money which they don't have. It's fine when they are making profit, but once they lose, once the loans cannot be paid back, the banks will go bankrupt. That is why Riba is dangerous, because you are giving to the banks the right to make money out of nothing. The banks never have assets or investment as much as the amount of money they are lending. I am astounded that during the previous years, lending by banks were very small, about $1 million, $100 million. Today they lend billions of dollars, tens of billions of dollars. Where does this money come from? How do the banks lend so much money? Where does it come from? Are they keeping all this money in their vaults? Obviously not, they don't have. And they don't even have the gold. Initially they had gold, but of course they went off the gold standard for the simple reason that they just want to have more money than the gold reserve that they hold. So when you go off the gold standard, then you can issue more money. Obviously, the money that you issue without the backing of gold, that money depreciates in value. And the amount of depreciation that you see is tremendous. At the time of Bretton Woods, the amount fixed was $35 per ounce of gold. $35 per ounce of gold. Today it is $1,800 per ounce of gold. This reflects the amount of money that has been issued, also the devaluation of the money and the inflation that accompanies it. So the whole system has been abused. The banking system has created a lot of greed among people. And because they have so much greed, they begin to do what is not really morally right. Even though legally it may be right, but the abuse of the system led to so-called enrichment of these countries. The Western countries are supposed to be developed. They have very high per capita income. But all these are created out of nothing, out of banks issuing loans with money that they don't have. And because they were issuing these loans and the amounts of money increases so much, everybody wants to have a share of this wealth. And this includes the workers. The workers say, why are they, the investors, the management, the owners, making so much money for themselves? The workers also contribute to the creation of this wealth coming from the industries. So they demanded to be paid higher and higher wages. And of course, labor parties become governments. And they decided that workers must be paid ever increasing wages, despite the fact of knowing that when you increase wages, you also increase inflation. But never mind, the workers also must have a share. Not so much as the capitalists, but the workers were given what is considered to be a fair share of the wealth. And so wages in these Western developed countries went up through the ceiling, went up through the sky, became very high. In addition to that, there are other perks that were given to the workers, pensions, unemployment benefits, etc. All these things cost a lot of money. But the workers are happy, of course, because they are earning more money. Despite the inflation, they seem to have a better living standard than people in some other countries where wages are low. But when the crash came, when the crisis comes, they just cannot afford these high wages. These high wages have contributed towards the failure of the developed countries in the world market. Their products are too expensive because they have to pay high wages. And the cost of living in their country is very high. And therefore, the cost of producing goods becomes so high that they cannot compete in the international market. Unfortunately, their answer to that was to retreat into the financial market. In the financial market, you can make more money because if you sell currency, for example, you can make billions of dollars. But this financial market is not a real market. It is a gambling den. That's what they do. They bet on the rise or fall of anything, commodities, money, etc. Sometimes they win, but sometimes they lose. And when they lose, they will go bankrupt. But the worst part about the currency market, about the financial market, is that it creates very few jobs. You don't have to do anything. You just take a bet and you can make $1 billion. You don't need to employ anyone or create spin-offs in smaller industries, supporting industries, trading, shipping, transportation, insurance. You don't have to have all that because in the financial market, you can make tons of money without employing anybody. Today's currency trading, for example, is stated to be $4 trillion a day. $4 trillion a day. That is equal to Germany's total production in 1 year. But in Germany, that $4 trillion created jobs, created industries, spin-offs, trading, transportation, insurance, etc. But not with currency trading of $4 trillion. So again, there is this abuse of the system that is based on the banking system. So the crisis occurs, and there is a refusal to admit that they have abused the system. There is a dispute. They still want to have the good life. They don't want to reduce, no austerity program, because if you borrow money and you have no money to pay, you have to work harder, perhaps at lower pay because there's no jobs, in order to have the money to pay your debts. But what do we see in Europe? The people, the workers are demonstrating. They can't go on strike because they are unemployed. Spain, 25% of the workers in Spain are unemployed. So they have demonstration demanding to have the same kind of life they were used to. Very high pay, luxurious life, everything provided for by the government, and all kinds of perks given to them. They want to have that. But if you have that, you cannot create a surplus budget. And if you don't have a surplus budget, you cannot pay your debts. That's what I mean by saying that they refuse to acknowledge that they are poor and they must live like poor people. Save money, pay your debts. Then you overcome the crisis. But until now, we see them juggling with all kinds of ideas, how to maintain their lifestyle, their very luxurious lifestyle, and yet cause the economy to recover or the crisis to be over. It will not be over because they refuse to accept the mistakes that they have made, the abuses that they had indulged in. That is the reason. And basically, you go back to the banking system, because the banking system created by the Rothschild or other families gives the bank the power, A, to create money, and B, to lend this created money with a fixed return. So the urge, the greed, pushes them to create more and more money. Of course, the money gets devalued, but it doesn't matter. In terms of figures, they have created a lot of money and a lot of wealth. But of course, once it collapses, once the abuses go beyond a certain stage that it cannot be reversed, then you have the crisis. And until now, the crisis has not been resolved. Not in America, not in Europe. And if this goes on, of course, it's going to affect everybody, including us. That is why we must admit that this banking system is where the fault is. And we must reverse the system which has been open to abuses. Now, one of the reasons why the Islamic banking system is not involved in the present crisis is because you don't lend money that you create. If you do, then you must be involved in the business. And if the business loses, you lose, the bank loses. That's the basis of lending in the Islamic non-Riba system. So we have introduced this Islamic banking, and we have done away with Riba. We have created products to match the conventional system, and so far, the Islamic system has not got into the kind of crisis that you see happening with the conventional banking system. That is why we must have a very riba and its role in creating this crisis, and to do away with riba, but yet to make available funds for trading, for business, etc., because we need to increase the wealth of nations, because that is the only way for them to improve the quality of life, also to reduce poverty in their midst. So this conference on Riba is extremely important, and I hope that the ideas given just now, which would serve us to do away with riba, should be studied very carefully and applied. Of course, in Malaysia, we have had Islamic banking, perhaps earlier than most countries. It has been successful. Even the conventional banks have adopted it, and while the volume is not as big as the conventional banking system, but Islamic banking, non-riba or la-riba banking has made an impact on the development of the society. But beyond that, of course, we have to curb greed. Greed is what resulted in the conventional banking system failing. I hope and I pray that Muslims avoid greed. You must not be greedy, because when you become greedy, even the La Riba banking system can be abused by some people who are very skillful in finding ways and means of getting around not just ordinary man-made laws, but even the laws of God can be abused by the followers of the religion. I thank you.
Thank you, Tun, for the most insightful speech. And now, without any delay, let us present the GLOMIF presentation. We apologize for the inconvenience occurred. Okay, I shall now call upon Encik Mazlan Muhammad Ali, President and CEO of Fine Line Technologies Sdn Berhad, to present a token of appreciation to Tun. And I shall now call upon Yang Berbahagia, Tuan Haji Hishamuddin Tan Sri Ubaidullah, Trustee of Ubaidullah Foundation, on behalf of RIFCON, to present a token of appreciation to Tun. Thank you very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will now break for refreshments for about 45 minutes, where the refreshment spread can be found right outside the hall. Again, to all these speakers and moderators, you are invited to be on stage to have a photography session. We kindly expect all the guests to be back into the hall at about 11:30 a.m. for our first session. Thank you. All the speakers and moderators are invited to be on stage for the photography session.